Hi, and welcome everyone. My name is Pavel Senkel. I'm the Dean of Academic Affairs here at Prescott College in Prescott, Arizona. I'm being joined by three of my colleagues, Dr. Serene Saadeh, Dr. Mary Poole, and Dr. Emily Affolter. Thank you for joining us for our session today, titled Social Justice Education at Prescott College, where we're going to be talking about, over the next few minutes as you join us, not just social justice as a core element of our curriculum, but also as an element of our governance, of our institutional structure, and our relationship with communities, both human and more than human. So when thinking about social justice education, I'm often inspired by the words of Jiddu Krishnamurti, a 20th century Indian educator and writer. And I think he's worth quoting here when he said that the highest function of education is to bring about an integrated individual who is capable of dealing with life as a whole and not separate out into disciplines and not necessarily separated out into their different spheres of influence or sectors. So the 6 qualities on this slide really describe a single integrative pedagogy in which each of the elements depends upon all of the others. And the through line for these is relationality. Relationality of place, to community, to the more than human world. And one thing that we're trying to do here at Prescott College is to really lean into the idea of relationality, where the webs are supportive of that interaction and integration, rather than siloed with part communities or one another and different disciplines. So one reason that we've opted at Prescott College to really emphasize social justice education across everything we do, is really in response to the crisis that we're at. This is an inflection point in higher education. And as an example, in 1967, which is roughly the year, 1 year after Prescott College was actually founded in 1966, 1 in 5 university students in the U.S. majored in the major arts. And today it's 1 in 20. So it's a fourfold decline that really raises for me deeper questions about what education is for, what is the value for communities, for individuals, and do institutions, liberal arts institutions like ours, continue to serve the communities that are a part of it. So the systems that we teach us to still be co-create with the burdened opportunities for engaging in racial capitalism, colonialism, heteropatriarchy, climate, food, epistemic challenges. These aren't really separate problems. They're the same problem at different registers. So they all come together across the curriculum here at Prescott College. And what we try to do is look through a transdisciplinary or integrative lens on how we can really think about social justice as the thread which holds the curriculum and the institution together. So a more linear curriculum assumes stable inputs and endpoints, and it's not really a linear progression as we're all aware. And it's really much more iterative, integrative, and relational process whereby the community of learners here, whether the student, staff, leadership, administrative staff, and faculty, co-create the learning environment. And that's both inside the classroom, whether it's online or on campus, with our student affairs department, to create that community where students really engage in these causes. Social justice education really requires navigating uncertainty, and this is a more and more uncertain and unsteady world. And as the diagram on the slide shows, that's modeled on an adaptive ecological cycle, part of the penarchy model, it really looks at education as a cyclical process, but less so a circle, but more, it looks a bit like an infinity symbol. And what it speaks to is really that, rise and flourishing are almost always followed by, some might describe it as collapse, but I like to describe it as an opportunity to imagine and recreate, reimagine what the future might bring. And so as we look at our curriculum developments, as we look at the institutional future, or the future of higher education generally, I think looking at a model like that, which is really regenerative in its ecological modeling, is really, I think, the way to go.
I have the honor of being both a graduate of this institution as well as being somebody who teaches here and works in our departments. What I've learned about Prescott College and our social justice education, and what I've been lucky enough to be a part of directing, is that social justice education here is not just a curricular activity that happens in our social justice programs, whether at undergrad or at the grad level. It is active, it's field-based, it's part of the campus and larger collective community that make this institution. It's part of how we approach the world. It's something that our students are constantly putting into practice as they learn ideas in the classroom, as they learn ideas in student clubs and in community dialogue, and then they're taking it into the work. It's a pedagogy that is student-led and student-driven. It's cross-curricular, so we're seeing it in classes that are happening across programs. And it's designed to foster critical engagement and a sense of community care, that care that we show to human and more than human worlds. We say that it's iterative, it's experiential, it's relational. It is something that is being fostered in classrooms, grown across the relationality that exists in this place, and also sometimes it's getting cooked and baked. It's just part of how we operate here. Everything from our student food justice group and the work that they're doing to make locally grown healthy food accessible to all of our students. It is work we're doing at the DuPois Center that you'll learn about later. It is so deep and it is so reflective, and it's built out of this very strong scholarship-based, community-based, community-oriented pedagogy. Our goal here is to challenge the assumptions that we all come to this place about the world, and to open the doors of this community to Prescott, Arizona, to the communities that we belong to build the skills that our students need to become leaders in the field. And those skills can't just be built in our classrooms. They have to be built through Free Store Friday and Soup Lunch, through the social justice residency, through the teach-ins. We've used them historically at this institution as a tool for diving collectively into these really complex, challenging global and domestic topics, whether it was U.S. federal government attacks on higher education in the past few years, climate change teach-ins that we've done annually for many years, or in 2024, a student-organized teach-in for Palestine and Israel that really illustrates how cross-program collaboration, combining social justice, food systems, and sustainability work can come together to have really deep and challenging discussions about the world we live in and the issues and challenges that we face, and to do so by integrating media literacy, history, structured dialogue, shared meals, and cultural learning. Food justice has become a central thread at this institution that runs through our entire institutional practice. It's a vehicle for our community building that happens outside of the traditional classroom space. It is where our students come together to share meals with each other, where we learn how to take care of each other, where we teach our students how to cook and they teach us how they cook and how they engage in the world. It's a mutual aid effort. Like I mentioned, the Free Store Friday and Community Soup and the work that they're doing with the sustainability crew, the work that we do with our campus cookbook, the work that we do every Wednesday when we open the doors to Soup Lunch to the larger community. We're fostering a collective resilience, and opening those campus doors allows for us to be a more sustainable institution, because then we are part of the community. We're not just a place that is here on community land. One of my favorite projects is our annual cookbook. We're actually working on that second edition right now, is the Peace and Justice Community Cookbook. It can be really hard to think about a cookbook as an act of social justice, but it is. It's a community-sourced annual project designed to ensure our students know how to feed themselves while centering food access conversations. So this next edition has, a whole chapter on mutual aid cooking, how to cook in bulk if you want to feed unhoused neighbors. What kind of celebration food do we want, right? And food justice has to start with our ability to know how to cook. Right. One of the projects I'm most excited about right now actually came out of some of our student organizing. So Miranda Morez, Sage Hopper, some of the other students we have on campus are very deeply connected to the work we do around food justice. And they're leaders in that topic. And taking lessons they learned from class capitalism and colonization, they're now trying to think about, okay, how do we turn food access conversations on this campus into food justice work? Bringing a farmer's market to campus, expanding our food shelves so that they have more healthy options for students, sourcing local produce, working with community organizations. It's part of how we approach food justice here. It's very relational. It is very campus-oriented. It's very community-oriented, and our students are leading the charge there. Another place that they lead the charge is in our annual social justice residency. It's one expression of opening the campus doors to our neighbors and to the public for a shared collective learning. It's a bigger version of our teach-ins. We're very excited that the 2027 residency will be bringing our social justice and food systems programs together to co-create a public space around food access, food justice, and food sovereignty, right? We're super excited to see our students take the lead in building that residency space.
I think a big part of our work is to help students access visions, as we lead them into engagement with the crisis of the 21st century and all of its manifestations. And one of the places that we find that vision is in the indigenous nations that are engaged in cultural survival for their own communities. We look to them for evidence that another world is possible. And I think that possibility is demonstrated in the resilience of indigenous communities that have survived colonization and whose relationships with the earth have also survived. That survival, that resilience is something that is very profound, I think, for those of us in settler communities to engage with. For a college this size, really for a college of any size, Prescott College has an unusual depth in collaborative practices. And one example of that is our campus in Maasai Land, East Africa. There we demonstrate a decades-long commitment to understanding how collaboration can work when we move past helping and instead embrace solidarity. We don't call our programs field studies because that implies that we come from a center to a periphery, right? So we refer instead to it as community collaboration. And our relationships are long-term and reciprocal. So we and our community partners, we don't help each other so much as we find mutual points of synergy. And then those are always directed, however, by the priorities of our partner communities, the communities that live in the places where we are partnering, right? So what we find is that decolonization is indeed not a metaphor in long-term sustainable work. It's a necessity. So we follow the community's priorities. That leads us to the ongoing challenge faced by indigenous communities everywhere that I know of, dual challenge of eviction from land and occupation of land. And that ends up being the core of our collaboration in Maasai Land. Here's a couple of examples of how the collaboration shows up in the classroom. In the Mara Guides Association, which is a first union of Maasai workers in the tourism industry, Prescott College has for many years trained guides in a class shared by Prescott students who are learning about wildlife, conservation, and tourism. And then the guides get certification, which enables them to work in the tourism industry. And they also learn about the Western cultures. They learn a lot of things Maasai people have been discriminated against in the tourism industry. And so we help to provide resources so that community members can achieve those jobs. So another example is in the Maasai Grassroots Justice Clinic. That's a program that brings lawyers to teach Maasai community activists and train them as paralegals. And so the curriculum focuses on constitutional law in Kenya and elsewhere related to indigenous land rights. And we produce Know Your Rights media for the community. And we do that work with our students in the classroom, also learning those things. And many of our students look to become involved in indigenous land rights in their home communities and other places. One of our current projects has been to lead a lawsuit, actually, with the Marriott Corporation for building a high-end hotel in the path of the wildebeest migration. All of this work takes place at the Dupuy Center, which is the home of Prescott College in Maasai Land, and also of our partner organization, which is the Institute for Maasai Education, Research, and Conservation. That organization, MERC, was established in the 1980s in Kenya and has a long history of environmental conservation, cultural survival, collaborating, connecting with indigenous communities all over the world. We teach a lot of classes at Dupuy in Maasai culture and wildlife, medicinal plants, as well as the challenges faced by the community, indigenous policy. And those classes are all taught by community members, not all of whom speak English. So we teach actually the students coming from Prescott College to speak enough of the Ma language so that they can understand the teachers to a degree. They share the burden of translation. The Dupuy Center exists as a community organizing center, and that work continues there. We do research at the Dupuy Center and archival development, and we write, we decolonize history, versions of Maasai history. We're producing a museum that will open next April. We actually sometimes are taken to historical sites by community members to see parts of evidence of massacres and other pieces of Maasai history that has not been written about. And we also exist at Dupuy to imagine new possibilities for community-based, indigenous-led tourism in Masaya.
Our doctoral program in sustainability education brings a transdisciplinary cadre of scholar activists together to look at today's most pressing problems at the intersection of social and environmental justice. Our scholars are doing work that is experiential, action-oriented, community-based, and rooted in an imagination for a more relational, accountable future for social justice. We have a cohort-based learning model that is intended to really build relationships that deepen and sustain one's own understanding of how they orient towards a social justice problem in collaboration with others who might have a really different set of skills, but a similar thread around a value that we can all get behind.
One of the strengths of our program is that we have scholars from all over the world in all different fields coming together to think about today's greatest crises and issues from really different angles. And so what we typically see is cross-pollination and collaboration across sectors, fields, disciplines, and really busting up silos that can keep us in our own echo chambers and come together for something much stronger and fortified. Some of the careers that our scholars end up with are moving into higher education faculty positions, having policy roles in social and environmental justice work, sustainability director or equity consultants, and folks who are really advancing equity pedagogy, culturally responsive teaching, and organizational directors around what just and sustainable futures might look like. We liken our students and ourselves to monarchs. We are a diasporic group of scholar activists who transgress borders and pair long-distance vision with local action. We are powerful and resilient. We are attuned to changing ecosystems, and we are connected to place, even as places change and evolve. We remember our critical histories and collectively invest in the future. We also see the scholarly process in the PhD as one of significant transformation. And like monarchs, we are interdependent in our transformation, moving from caterpillar to chrysalis to butterfly, together with patience, time, remembering, and tenacity. I want to say a little bit about our doctoral faculty who are really leading the charge on transformative education here. I think it's helpful to spotlight our faculty because you can start to imagine what transdisciplinarity really looks like and how these different sets of skills and understandings can inform a deeper and more embodied sense of what socially just movements can look like that are successful. For example, Dr. Fernando Ona is someone who does work around systemic trauma and with survivors of torture. And he looks at interfaith healing practices to think about how compassionate care for displaced persons can support healing futures. We have Dr. Sarah Fox, who is an environmental humanities scholar who writes about nuclear exposure and environmental racism. We have Dr. Kimberly Greason, who centers indigenous epistemologies and thinks about multi-species entanglements and conservation. We have Dr. Molly Bignight Antonio, who's Shawnee, Muskie, Delaware, and Cherokee, and weaves indigenous epistemologies, language revitalization, and community building together, and thinks about how we can support indigenous fortitude, like Dr. Mary Poole was talking about, in our research and praxis. We have Dr. Scott Ramsey, who's a wilderness educator and founder of the Alaska Outdoor Science School, who thinks about social and environmental justice as interconnected. And my own work, I serve as the Associate Dean of our doctoral program and faculty, and my work is really looking at hegemonic structures, how power structures inform research and practice, and how we could think about teaching, leading, and imagining futures that support a liberatory and equitable future with respect to the STEM fields, K-16 education, climate justice, and research initiatives. I wanted to highlight a little bit about our PhD symposium, which happens on campus annually since our scholars live all over the world. And so this year's symposium just showcased a profound commitment to social justice and human and more than human flourishing, from looking at how poverty reduction through a global model of sustained education to looking at Black intersectional conservation to thinking about accessibility in outdoor education. As we look across this dialogue with my beloved colleagues here who have talked about different pieces of the institution and how we foster, support, and uplift social justice efforts, we have to continually ask ourselves questions, especially when higher education is at risk, especially when social justice is at risk, because we need to double down on these core questions just upon why we're here today. How do we continue to look at systems of power and privilege and think about restructuring those systems in ways that amplify access and opportunity for folks who have been minoritized systemically? How do we approach our work and our curricula with a critical historical analysis of injustice, with an effort to rebuild, reimagine, and move towards something healing, liberatory, and fortified by Indigenous communities and other communities who have been systemically left out or minoritized by the conversation? And how do we stay grounded in this work, stay collaborative in this mark, and accountable to socially just futures as we move forward with a very uncertain future, knowing one thing, that we all care deeply about social justice pedagogy.
Thank you so much for joining our session today. As we move forward and continue this conversation, we'd invite more dialogue with you all if you're interested. Prescott College and faculty and leadership invite you to explore how we can create meaningful social justice education in our classrooms and across our institutions. And together, as we continue this dialogue, our hope is to examine strategies for embedding justice education that's both transformative and achievable.